Mark Rogers TV talking postseason play, and it's Stanford. It's North Carolina at the Sun Bowl. And we bring in Don King from Last Word on Sports. And Don, I got to say, first of all, that it's very good to see you because it's been a while and you are one of the very first, one of the originals here on Mark Rogers TV.
And I'm honored to be so. Glad to be back, Mark.
Thank you, Don. So one of the main storylines, one of the main themes as we talk about any of these bowl games is people are looking for motivation for the players to play hard, motivation for the fans to watch the games. Well, the big motivation was you got to see Christian McCaffrey play. Maybe you didn't as much this season for a lot of people because Stanford dropped off the national radar early. So maybe he, despite another outstanding year, wasn't all over the map as he was in 2015, but the kid's not playing. Everybody's chiming in as to whether he should play, whether this is a horrible thing or it's just self-preservation. Your thoughts about the McCaffrey decision?
Okay, so my overall thoughts. I think it's his call. I get it. I understand the widespread disappointment. From a personal standpoint, I tried to be angry with him, and I cannot muster outrage. I just can't come up with it. It's his life. It's his body. Shelf life for running backs is incredibly short in the NFL. It's all about the number of hits taken. I have to believe if this were a college football playoff game or even a Rose Bowl, I think he plays. But honestly, I have very little consternation about his decision to protect his own body and sit this one out. I think it's a bit of a new wave of kind of decision making for these young student athletes. Fournette obviously announced he was going to forego the game a little bit sooner than McCaffrey, but in both cases, they're basically looking at sitting out a more or less an exhibition that doesn't really have any that much standing from a national standpoint for either of these programs. So, I applaud him for all that he has brought to the program, for the outstanding career that he has now concluded. I wish him well, and I'll root for him on Sundays. I wish he was going to play, but he's not, and it's his decision, and I don't begrudge him the decision that he chose to make.
Don, in no way did this season live up to the standards that have been set by Jim Harbaugh and extended by David Shaw, but there was that rough patch at the beginning. We knew that the schedule was front-loaded. It would be difficult to get through, and the team not only lost, they looked pretty ugly in a couple games against the Washington teams. But now you've got a pretty nice little run going here to finish off at 9-3. So how do you feel about this season, depending on the bowl game, of course?
Yeah, I think there are two different camps here. I know a lot of folks who've gotten used to the lofty standards that Stanford has delivered against in the past few years. 3 out of the last 4 Pac-12 championships, Rose Bowls, Orange Bowls, Fiesta Bowls, top 3 national ranking at the end of last season. There are a lot of fans who were disappointed and, really unhappy with the way the season unfolded. I have to tell you, I think they were overly optimistic to begin. I had Stanford finishing 9-3 this year, just as it ultimately did. I thought the wins and losses would be distributed slightly differently. I thought maybe UCLA versus Washington State. I thought maybe Notre Dame versus Colorado. But other than that, 9-3 is kind of exactly what I thought this team was going to be this season, and that's exactly the way it played out. And frankly, the back half proved to be as navigable as we thought it was going to be early in the season, and the team did what it was supposed to do and won out those last 5 games. And it's easy to say, oh well, Shaw messed up and he played the wrong quarterback, and if he played Chris earlier, this would. I don't know that I buy that in the least. If Chris had been running for his life up in Seattle like Ryan Burns had been, I don't think the result would have been any different. I don't think it would have mattered a bit. As a matter of fact, I would argue that the 5-game winning streak coincides just as nicely with Nate Herbig taking over at left guard as it does Keller Chris taking over at quarterback. And I think he had every bit as much to do with the late season success, not downplaying Chris. He's played well and he did a great job taking care of the football. But Herbig, was just named first team, All-America true freshman, and with very good reason. The line looked incredibly different once he was inserted into the starting lineup.
And we don't know what the quarterbacks looked like in practice and what they were showing the coaches
exactly
within the confines of the system versus they turn into a different guy when they hit the field, because we saw the same thing at USC. Oh, Clay Helton picked the wrong guy.
Yeah.
Well, that's easy for us to say after we see it play out, and the level of opponent has something to do with the results as well.
The level of opponent, and in both cases, the younger guy, they continue to progress and improve in practice through the season. Both got some time on the field in games. They both improved along the way, and that's what would happen. And frankly, that's what you would hope to have happen with your younger players. That's going to be the case. And folks forget, Ryan Burns came out throwing darts against Kansas State in the opener. He completed his first 9 passes, and he looked for all the world to be the far more accurate of the two. It looked like the decision was dead right until we got a couple of results we didn't like. And, this thing just isn't that tidy. It doesn't quite work like that.
Don, did the defense play up to what you expected? And when I say expected, it didn't play up to the standards of previous seasons, but you were expecting a bit of a decline overall. Did that hold true on the defensive side? Because the numbers played out fairly well, but not as dominant as the previous editions.
I thought the defense actually was just fine all year long, to be honest. The problems that arose against, in particular, Washington State and a little bit against Colorado had to do with injuries in the defensive secondary. But the defensive line and the linebackers, as we anticipated, were stout all year long. And there was more depth than there has been in past years. And frankly, with everybody healthy, all 11 starters healthy, that defense is kind of scary. And frankly, we haven't broken down the game yet, but I think that bodes ill for North Carolina. I think this is a really good defensive unit that hasn't played together all that much throughout the course of the season. But when they've played together, and I will hold out that Colorado game as an example, Stanford wound up on the wrong end of that because of an ugly offensive performance. But that was a pretty good team that they held to 10 points. And the defense deserved a lot of credit for that performance.
All right, you set us up for this matchup, which I think is a really good one, because the one down year we saw out of Stanford out of the last 5 or 6, they weren't really that down when compared to a like-seeded team in another good conference in the Big Ten. That Maryland team was all smoke and mirrors, and it wasn't even a game. It was unwatchable. This is, I think, a different animal. This North Carolina team is a quarterback who might be not the best college quarterback in the nation, but the best projecting to the next level in Mitch Trubisky, a fleet of wide receivers who scare most teams, all sorts of talent. Offensively, I hate to call any team soft. These guys are football players. They lift weights. They run hard. But there is soft relative to other teams, relative to the rest of the sport. And North Carolina might be one of those teams that's really not quite as hard hitting and tough physically as what Stanford's used to and what maybe they could be.
I'll agree with all of that, but this is a team that had a solid season. They challenged themselves, played a really tough Georgia team to open the season, didn't get the result they wanted, but held their own for 3 quarters and put a scare into them. Played really, really well. Had some ups and downs, and among the ups, some of those were pretty daggone impressive. I mean, this team beat Virginia Tech, and if it weren't for kind of a bit of a slide late in the season, I take that back. North Carolina never mind. They did not beat Virginia Tech. My bad. But they did beat Miami. That's the game I'm thinking of. They beat Miami at the time when we thought Miami was still gonna be pretty good and might contend for a division title.
They beat Florida State on the road.
They beat Florida State in Tallahassee. I mean, they looked pretty daggone good for a while there. But stumbled down the stretch is really what it came down to. And you lose 2 of your last 3 to your in-state conference rivals. Win either one of those games, and you're looking at the potential, at least, for slipping your way, or win both of those games, and you slip your way into the conference championship game. versus the winner of the other division. But they weren't able to do that. But that is a team that had the kind of talent that they could have been there at the end had they been able to hold it together a little bit better. The thing that I'd be worried about, were I a Tar Heel fan right now, as much as Trubisky can spin it, and as well as dangerous as they are, and as well as they can light up the scoreboard, they better be careful that they can actually get the ball for more than a few possessions. The problem North Carolina's got is that its defense is ranked number 95 in the FBS, and more importantly, even without Christian McCaffrey, North Carolina's rush defense is number 121. Just for those of you keeping score at home, that ain't good. And I think you're going to get a whole lot of Bryce Love left, right, and up the middle, a little bit of Cameron Scarlett sprinkled in. Would not be shocked to see a few jet sweeps run to some of the wide receivers. Just all kinds of diversity in the run game. But if I'm David Shaw and Mike Bloomgren, and I've gotten extra practices for Herbig and the other guys up front on the offensive line, guys like Nick Wilson in the ogre position, I am going to load it up, and I'm going to bring 6 offensive linemen all night long on first and second down and dare them to stop me. And if North Carolina can't stop them, it's going to be a really, really long night.
Yeah, because this sounds so stereotypical, but it's right in front of me. 9 wins for Stanford. They ran over 100 yards in all the 9 wins. They failed to run and hit the century mark in the 3 losses. And you would think that if there's a good team out there that's going to give up that kind of yardage on the ground, it's North Carolina.
Yep, that's exactly right. And, this is one of those, there are a lot of times when you don't know what's coming. I will admit, last year's Rose Bowl game plan that David Shaw and company unleashed on Iowa, I didn't see coming. They came out firing, trips left on the very first snap from, of the game, and then 80-some-yard touchdown to McCaffrey streaking down the middle. I didn't see that coming. They kept the pressure on and, were very aggressive in the passing game all night long. This game plan, I think, really, really writes itself. I think you've got core strength of your team against a really glaring weakness of your opponent, and I don't think there's any reason to overthink this thing.
So those 30 carries, and when I say 30 carries, I mean more like 22 to 23 carries, 4 to 5 pass receptions out of Christian McCaffrey. Who are those going to go to? And is there anybody else? Because this is the transition game. It's the bowl game after the 15 practices, so it caps off the season and gives you the final record and ranking. But for people that watch football, it's also that catalyst for 2017. So there are other guys that you would like to see step forward and show you something for next fall.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I really think running the ball, the game plan isn't going to change a whole lot. I think you're going to see Bryce Love do all of the things that you've been seeing Christian McCaffrey do brilliantly well for the last 2 seasons. You're going to see Cameron Scarlett step in to spell him. I think you're going to see Scarlett also take over the short yardage duties that McCaffrey had been handling this year. But I think the game plan is going to look the same. I think you're not going to do anything differently with Love versus what you would have done if McCaffrey were available. Perhaps pass to him slightly less. He's not quite as polished or as proven as a receiver out of the backfield. And if you do pass to him, you might pass to him a little bit wider and just take advantage of that blazing speed. I mean, people who haven't seen Love play or really focused on him are going to be astonished when they realize that he's actually faster than McCaffrey is, which almost sounds heretical to say out loud, but it's true. That kid can fly. He's not quite, he doesn't have quite the wiggle that McCaffrey does, and he's probably not quite as strong, but he is an every down back, and Shaw has said very publicly in the past week that he thinks of him as an every down back, and you are going to see him play that role just as you're going to see him play that same role all through 2017. And my guess is Love is fired up. That young man has got to be really excited to have this in front of him, and I am really confident he's not going to disappoint the Cardinal faithful.
Don, I have a definite lean on this game, but the one thing I'm going to do that I rarely do before I make a prediction is I'm going to check the weather forecast in El Paso, because if you watch the Sun Bowl year to year, yeah, there's not going to be 8 feet of snow out there. But it gets real raw, like 38 degrees, the wind coming off the plane, whipping around. And That's not a real good element for North Carolina to be throwing the football. Forget the temperature, that wind,
Yep.
and just that type of game versus Stanford saying, "Hey, we'll throw it 12 times. That's fine.
Yep.
We don't need to throw it more than that."
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. I do think the weather could come into play in a negative way for North Carolina. I think the weather will have no bearing on what Stanford tries to do and ultimately comes out and succeeds in doing. I don't see this being a blowout. I don't think this is a mismatch like the Foster Farms Bowl from a couple of years back. North Carolina is a better team than that. But I think Stanford's going to take the air out of the ball and just pound, pound, pound. And unless North Carolina can find a rush defense that they had not previously been able to execute, I don't see how it ends well. I do think you'll see Chris take a few shots over the top just to make sure that things stay loose. You're going to see some play action passes. You've seen him develop over the last 5 weeks. He's gotten much more comfortable in the passing game, and in particular, the game up at Oregon, he looked phenomenal in that one. So just a little bit of that, just enough to keep the linebackers having to, not overcommit to staying in the box and bringing the safety forward a little bit for the play action and over the top. I think if there's any ability to throw it all on the Stanford side, I just think they're going to play keep away and run the ball all night long.
There's not a bowl game that they've made yet that I don't like. So I like to try to catch all of them. That's impossible, and it doesn't happen. But especially once the Power Fives get out there, Don.
Yeah.
And this is even a sneaky good matchup that if I can only watch about 6 to 8 bowl games, this might make the cut.
I agree. I really do like the matchup. Yeah, it's El Paso is not the most enticing locale in the world. What typically happens, and I've seen a couple of emails already. The athletic department will hit us up and say, "Hey, buy a ticket and we'll give it to a veteran." This is a big, a lot of Air Force and other military installations in that area. And I did see an ad this morning on your ESPN platform saying that StubHub has tickets available for this game at $22. So, that tells you everything you want to know. I'm not sure that the attendance is going to be what we might like it to be, but I do think it has the potential to be an entertaining matchup. And as much as I like Stanford and I like its ability to exploit UNC's run defense, you got a quarterback, you got a chance, and Trubisky can spin it. He could absolutely light it up. So, there's a possibility this is not going to be one of those walkover games. It's not even worth looking at. It's just one that seems to be, how it's going to go based on what we've seen Stanford do. And given the matchup, if these teams are both who they've been all season, you can kind of see how it's likely to go.
All right. It's the Sun Belt in El Paso, Texas. It's for a long time been a destination for the Pac-12. The ACC connection, I don't quite get. I don't think their fans necessarily want to travel from the southeast portion of the country, nor is the recruiting factor helping them at all. So don't understand it from that standpoint, but it gives us a nice matchup. Washington State, Miami last year. This year should be a good one with Stanford taking on North Carolina. Don King from Last Word on Sports helping us break it down like only you can, Don. We appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Merry Christmas.